Welcome back to College Football Addiction. Drake Seatole locked on Big 12 with us today. Drake, we've talked a little bit about scheduling in the Big 12 earlier when we talked about rivalry games. Is the Big 12 making another misstep with this Friday night? Is epidemic the right word? I don't want to say I don't want to go full on pandemic,
Can't
but
say pandemic anymore. Can't say pandemic.
but thoughts on this Friday night situation with the Big 12?
It plays off as scared. And not having a rivalry weekend is something that I said is a scared move by the Big 12. Look, I'm very supportive of Brett Yormark. I think that his regime as commissioner of the Big 12 Conference has gone swimmingly, and I trust the guy as a businessman, no doubt. It doesn't mean he's infallible. It doesn't mean there aren't things I disagree with or that I would want to change. And another piece of this is announcing a myriad of Friday night games in the Big 12, trying to build viewership that the conference otherwise wouldn't have got if they're competing with the SEC or the Big 10 on a Saturday. That's the message here. We can't compete with the SEC. We can't compete with the Big 10. It's the same reason college football and the NFL try to stagger things as not to step over each other, because neither one wants to compete with the viewership of the other. The Big 12 saying, hey, we're going to go on Friday nights. Here's the biggest problem. The biggest problem with this. Your conference is mostly predicated on the state of Texas and high school football. Everybody loves that the Big 12 is able to recruit these 3-star, 4-star kids from the high school ranks and turn them into knockdown, drag out, good old gridiron football players on Saturdays. Well, now those kids are on the gridiron while you're playing your marquee football game. Now in the state of Texas, every Friday night when the Big 12 is having a game, that it is religion there. I mean, I worked in radio in Texas for 5 years, and on Friday nights, everything shuts down. That's the same way in Georgia. It's the same way in Colorado. It's the same way in Arizona, where those kids are trying to make themselves better athletes to compete at the collegiate level. Now the Big 12 saying, hey, when Kansas State goes at Arizona, when TCU goes at Arizona State, which could be a huge game, when West Virginia on a rebuild goes to BYU, or Houston at UCF, you're not going to be able to watch that game because we're going to put it on a Friday because we don't think that Saturday would get as much viewership. So that's what we're looking at. I mean, even Utah at Kansas, which is the last game of the regular season for both of those schools, is on rivalry weekend on a Friday. I just don't know how much juice, and maybe those two teams, Kansas bounces back, Utah bounces back. They create a top 15 matchup that has Big 12 championship, possibilities, capabilities. Something's on the line there, maybe. But now it's on a Friday. You lose the luster of this big-time Saturday college football by putting your games here. And I know. The message is, well, we want to do things different. We have to do things different. We have to catch up. But it plays as scared to me. It's the same thing. It's the same thing as not having a rivalry weekend. Sure, you're getting creative, but if your creativity is kind of invalidating you as a conference, was it worth it? If you're throwing the white flag out there, you're waving it and saying, you know what, I give up. We're going to have to play a lot of games on Fridays. The SEC would never do this. The Big 10 is not doing this. The Big 12 is, and that's just not a very good optic.
Yeah, I do think there's some pros. I don't think it's great for what you just mentioned, recruiting. It's my least favorite thing. I think Florida State plays 2 Friday games this year, and I don't like that. Right? It's short week. It's not the same amount of rest that you would normally get. Now 2 of these are opening week of the season, so not as big of an issue there with Georgia. But those are the out of conference ones, right? The Georgia Tech, Colorado, and the Auburn, Baylor.
Yeah, but I want to note here, TJ, they just moved that Baylor one like last week. That's a very odd move to say, hey, coming up with this up-and-coming SEC school that needs a big win, up-and-coming Big 12 school is trying to get back in the saddle with its head coach. Let's move this game off of Saturday. Another one, again, that's like opening weekend of Texas high school football too, and the game's in Waco. Stupid. Yeah. You know, why now? Why this?
So to play devil's advocate, to counter it a little bit,
yeah,
could it work for what Yormark wants? Like it does hurt the recruiting side, but like Georgia Tech, Colorado, a Georgia Tech team that led the ACC this year in viewership. Now, let's put some guardrails around that. One of those games was a standalone game in Dublin where no one else was playing. The other was the 7,000 overtime game against Georgia. So Georgia Tech has never, outside of last year, led the ACC. But against the Colorado team that we mentioned in our last segment, no more Hunter, no more Sanders. I think there's going to be a lot of intrigue there. You got 2 games on Black Friday, like you mentioned, the Arizona State rivalry and the Kansas-Utah. If both teams have bounced back, that could be a big one. though we don't love it, could this end up working out really well from your mark, from the marketability, the TV standpoint? And could we at least, will we look back and say like, okay, didn't love it for certain reasons, but for other reasons, this move worked out?
There is a very good chance that because the way Brett Yormark works, we all go foot in mouth and say, you know what, Brett, you did it. But I kind of go back to some things that happened last season. It was TCU that lost to Houston on a Friday night, and it lost a lot of the luster. Most people are not watching college football on their Friday night. The belief here is that there are enough diehard fans that will turn it on the way they do the NFL on Thursday, or the way they do the NFL on Monday. There are enough diehard fans that they'll watch a game on Friday. And honestly, if this was a Thursday deal, I'd be way more fired up about it. That is an opportunity where the NFL is on Prime, so they're not garnering as many eyeballs. It's tougher to get to. Where if you're carrying a Big 12 game on a Thursday night where two teams are coming off of a bye, you're giving them even more rest for the following Saturday. That's great. The big piece of the Friday that bothers me, again, is butting up with high school football, competing with high school football, and competing in a market where, again, most college football fans are not used to watching big, good games on Friday unless it's the Pac-12 championship they played on that day. So, for so many years. And yeah, he's a genius. He's a super genius. So maybe we do look up in a year or two and say that worked, but I'm not sure if I'm just not sure if the ratings are going to be there for the Big 12 conference. Whereas on a Saturday, maybe you open up that door. And at the same time, this TV, the way that the TV plays into this, hey, we could have had you on FS1 on Saturday. Now we can have you on ESPN2 on Friday. I probably make that trade. I would probably say yes to that so that every bar in America, every TGI Fridays in America is carrying the Big 12 on Friday night. But still, most people who are football fans have reserved Thursday for Thursday night football, Friday for high school football, Saturday for college football, and Sunday for the NFL. And trying to teach an old dog new tricks is not very easy, especially when Texas is your most important state. This looks at all the Texans, the proud Texans who love Big 12 football, and it says, hey, we're going to play in the middle of your coveted high school football night. Sorry about it. And those people just aren't going to watch.
Yeah, I think and I will say, to now play devil's advocate to my own self and say like, oh, well, maybe this does work out from a ratings perspective. The ACC plays a lot of big games on Friday nights too, because they're scared, I guess I'll use the same word that you did at the beginning of going up against some really big matchups in the Big Ten and the SEC. The ACC on Friday nights this year, Louisville and Miami play. That's been a great game for the last couple of years. Florida State plays twice on Friday nights. Clemson and Louisville play on Friday night. SMU has a game on Friday night. Belichick has 2 games on Friday night. And so I think there's some competition there. Not that the Big 12 and the ACC are really competing, because I think they're more on the ship of let's stay together and let's kind of do things in unison. But, if Clemson and Louisville is on a Friday night and you've got a Big 12 game that same week, I don't know. I mean, that's going to be a pretty tough ratings draw for those Big 12 teams anyway, just considering Clemson could be a top 5 team at that point. So, yeah, it might work out, but it might just fall on its face. And then you might just have the frustration of the recruiting thing and not really see the ratings bump. A lot of that's going to depend on how good the teams are that's playing, right? If there's a ranked matchup for one conference and unranked for the other, it doesn't matter who they are, right? Florida State's playing some nobody, then who cares? But I do think that there's a chance that it fails both ways, the recruiting side and the TV side. That's TBD, I guess.
No doubt. And I mean, there were so many Saturdays last year. The Saturday where Georgia played Kentucky and it was a tight game late, that was the only really good game on that night, and the Big 12 could have an opportunity to showcase a really good TCU-Arizona State game there and be the marquee game of the night, since the SEC takes the afternoon slot with their A1 game. But we've decided as a conference, nope, Friday it is.
Drake, you don't just do content on Fridays because you're not scared. Where can people find your show and follow you, bud?
Yeah, at Drake C. Toll or at Ella Big 12 on Twitter and wherever you find your podcast with Locked On Big 12.
Appreciate it, man.